Yeah, happy to see.
Councillor Henderson first.
Thank you, Mayor. Paragraph 14, officers recommend that the council consult on a reprioritisation of the 10.5 million of additional bus service expenditure under CATA. Could you talk me through that, or do we have someone that can talk me through that?
So what's being proposed there is 10.5 million of the climate action targeted rate is set aside for some bus service initiatives. It's proposed to continue to spend 10.5 million in that space, but to look at the nature of the services and consider reprioritising those in order to ensure that the best value for climate impact is achieved from that expenditure, given the changes to the baseline bus services that you discussed this morning. The governance, the Climate Action Targeted Rate Governance and Oversight Committee, I think you confirmed the membership of that on the 8th of December, will make recommendations on that, on the advice of our sustainability team and Auckland Transport, and that will be included in the proposal for consultation.
So just to follow up.
Consultation materials.
Thank you. Just to follow up, so is there any chance that that climate action targeted rate funding will be used to backfill existing services that were recently cancelled?
There is the possibility that that could be the case, but it will be on the basis that that would generate the best climate and service outcomes that were the basis for establishing this expenditure when the rate was adopted.
Okay, I reserve my right to speak on that. Thanks, Mayor.
Councillor Walker.
A few quick questions just in respect of the accommodation provider targeted rate. Are we in a position to provide in our information just the amount of money that we've put aside in that accommodation provider targeted rate that we may have to return, and conceivably some reference to the documentation around it, especially as it goes to the appeal?
We hadn't planned to include that information in the materials here because these are looking at the implications for expenditure next year in this activity. I would assume that there is maybe some reference in our budgets around that potential liability.
I'm simply asking that because I think it's material to the submission that someone might make, particularly the industry.
Thank you. I'll just add to what Andrew said. Yes, we're not, I believe, legally able to include APTR in this next aspect, given the status of the court hearing and decision on that being at the Supreme Court. In terms of provisions for legal items and liabilities, we do make those determinations based on legal advice and in other areas on actuary advice. So we have an amount, which I'm not able to disclose at this point, provided for within the annual accounts to the extent that we think that's necessary.
And the other question I've got is just around a number of the rates, like animal management and resource consenting. Can we convey some information alongside these rates that indicates what the relative revenue to expenses are, and whether or not those charges are being covered off by a subsidy from the general rate, that is, as to whether they're self-funding or not, and the extent of it?
We can ensure that we make reference to the degree to which this, my understanding is that to the extent we're allowed to under the law, we do cost recovery for our consenting fees. The legislation does limit the costs that we can recover for some of our consenting fees. For the dog fees, the cost recovery level is remains at the level the council set several years ago when it harmonised the charges for dog licensing. And I think that's referenced, it was referenced in my presentation to the workshop and may be referenced in our consultation materials, but we can ensure that that reference is made in the dogs fees consultation materials, and we'll do so.
That'd be great, and the reason I'm asking that is that if we want to reduce rates, quite obviously if we've got a self-funding principle, then that's a tick. And the last question I've got is just around the waste targeted rates, particularly the food scraps. Are we in a position to advise people such as myself and others that process their own food scraps actually save the council money? So it is a means of individuals taking an action to reduce our cost burden, because it's cheaper for people to do that. Quite obviously, they're still going to be hit by an amount, and there is no incentive, but it would be useful to convey that to information. Can we do that?
Certainly that piece of information would have been helpful last year when the council consulted on and at the time the council consulted on the food scraps. I'm not sure it's 100% relevant to what's being proposed at this point, but that will be a communication issue for us to consider in the context of our documentation.
Okay. The reason I'm raising it is it means that an individual household can take responsibility to reduce emissions and save the council money through the simple action of processing their own food waste. And that is a useful thing for them to be able to do, given that we do want to encourage reduction in emissions. Thanks.
Councillor Dalton, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here. Thank you, Your Worship. Andrew, when the CATA went out for consultation, it had a supporting documentation that listed the projects that it was going to be hypothecated to. So what is the risk now if we are not going to deliver on those bus routes that were in consultation document and it's repurposed somewhere else?
If we consult on the changes and seek the community's feedback on any changes that the Climate Action Targeted Rate Governance and Oversight Committee recommends to you, then that would eliminate the risk.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Watson?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just want to check what some of these increases on the active communities rental fees for bookable spaces really mean. I'm looking at the table on point 111. So if you want to go and play a game of badminton at Pakuranga Leisure Centre, so that increases from $10 to $20. So that can be a maximum, I suppose, of 4 people. It might only just be 2. The other ones there are for taking up the entire facility. So the Glenfield lap pool, is that the whole pool that's going to go from $72 to $200 and the 176% increase? So just the nature of the facility that is incurring this cost for the users, because they seem to be on the face of it some pretty dramatic increases in the fees.
So the actual and final implementation of these fees will be a decision for the local boards. This is standardising the fees across the local boards so that there's similar levels in different parts of the city. There are some fees that as a result are reducing, and yes, it will be the entire lap pool, which is a pretty substantial council asset investment. And while for that extra charge that you're referring to, most of the changes are small in absolute dollar terms, and some of the larger ones where there is harmonisation are for quite a substantial asset. I have one of my colleagues here, if there's anything further that Dave Stewart feels would help in responding to the councillor's question.
Just while you're at it there,
These have been workshopped with the local boards as well, I understand.
just like you got it on that little table there, is the estimated revenue on the side, is that in thousands or is it just dollars? Because according to this, you're going to put the Glenfield lap pole up from $72 to $200, and we're only going to make $155. You're going to rent it out 1.5 times, or is that 155,000?
Kia ora koutou. So the examples listed in point 111 are some of the extreme examples across the network. In attachment B, you'll find a full list of the schedule of the price changes, and as was referenced, there's ups and downs across the network, but this is a regional standardisation. So the example around the badminton court is bringing a badminton court in to a consistent level as other facilities across the region. On the far right hand side, the note around the estimated revenue impact, that's just in dollars. So these facilities are only used in this context very infrequently. So the overall financial impact is actually very small.
And this is the first stage of a two-stage review. So the first step that the team has undertaken is to standardise the fees as referred to in the badminton court. So if you're hiring a badminton court anywhere in the region, it'll be around this price. The second stage will be to look at what an appropriate level of cost recovery might be, and that'll be undertaken next year, obviously for the council and local boards to consider. Dollars.
They're dollars, Mr Mayor. They're dollars. So I don't know if it'll be going too much towards your 295 million deficit, but
So that whole process is only going to make $155. You want me to chip it in for you?
Why don't we have a whip round?
In total across the region, it is a standardisation with, as Dave and myself have said, with some coming up and some going down, and there isn't a material revenue impact overall. There may be next year, should you consider that a higher level of cost recovery is appropriate. This is a standardisation exercise, delivers a degree of equity across the region, but will ultimately be at the discretion of local boards as in its actual final implementation. And because the changes are outside the scope of inflation, in order for us to implement them, we've got an obligation to consult.
Talk about it and do it, but off you go. Any more questions from Julie Ferry?
Yeah, so, no, I just had one more, and it just went to the community occupancy guidelines. So these are guidelines, and again with these buildings here, and I'm sure then the local board can make whatever arrangement they want. But on the face of it, again, there's some pretty hefty increases being put up as guidelines for any of those buildings in terms of the maintenance fee and the administration fee. So what's the story with that?
So at present, as you can see from the current, the sums that the guidelines indicate to the local boards are very small and in no way reflect the costs that were actually incurred. All these guidelines are doing is adjusting it to a level of cost more reflective of the actual cost, and then allowing the local boards the discretion to raise the charge if they consider it's appropriate. By giving them that discretion, if they're needing to make some adjustments to their budget, they'll be able to do that for all different kinds of community groups, and they won't be restricted in looking by not being able to look at the community groups who may be having one of our facilities available to them. And so the boards will exercise that discretion. Presumably it just gives them a broader ambit to prioritise within their budgets, which you discussed this morning.
Okay, so that discretion will rest entirely with them.
Yep.
Okay, thanks, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Ferry, please.
Thank you. I've got a few, sorry, but I'll start with one that leads on from Councillor Watson. The maintenance fees, the wording in the document, the attachment, says that they are required, whereas the wording for the rental fees says proposed and if requested. So is the intention, because I think the conversation has been that the intention is that local boards could apply that maintenance fee if they wish to, but the wording in the document, if I read it right, suggests that it will be required. So that might just be something we need to fix in the final version, if the intention is to give local boards the flexibility. I've got a couple more on that specifically, but I'll let you go, Andrew.
We'll make sure that's clear.
Great, thank you. So will they have flexibility about charging a different amount? So will they either have to charge nothing or one of these amounts?
These are just a guideline.
Yeah.
So presumably they can go up to that level if they wish.
Okay, so they can't go above them though?
I suppose if they're a guideline, then...
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, I think that's important clarification to have for local boards. The other thing in that space that I'd like to understand is if a local board chooses not to charge, will they have to make up the difference from their own funds? Because we have seen that happen in the past where venue for hire fees and charges have been recommended to be put up, and some local boards have decided not to, and then been stung for the difference in funding.
So that doesn't apply to this community occupancy guidelines.
Right. I think those were all things that it would be really good to have clarified in writing for local boards.
Well spotted, councillor.
Thank you. On the CATAR, and I guess this again goes to Councillor Henderson, I think, and Councillor Dalton. So one of the issues I have with this, and at this point I'm minded to probably not support that specific part of this, is that we seem to be saying that we are setting a new baseline around what the bus services are. At the same time that we're saying that the reason that we have the lower bus services is primarily because of a driver shortage, which we're working to fix, and there's quite a lot of work underway to fix that. So given that this doesn't apply until 23-24, does that mean we're anticipating the same issues with the driver shortage? And acknowledging that's probably a question for AT, but in terms of the way that we're doing the consideration here about reprioritising that money.
So the Climate Action Targeted Rate Governance and Oversight Committee will be making some recommendations about how the 10.5 million should be spent. They'll base it on I'm assuming they'll base it on advice from Auckland Transport and our sustainability team, and the potential for movements in the future would be a logical thing for them to take into account in framing their advice for consultation.
Okay.
And then again in May, but also suggesting that the consultation be framed in such a way that there is scope to take into account any additional information that may be available at that time about potential changes to the baseline bus services to which they would be adding.
Okay. I think that would be good for us to give that feedback to AT about, they're working on this, I think they call it a recast of the bus services at the moment, but it's based on the short-term driver shortage, but actually we're potentially making some decisions based on that recast baseline that have implications beyond that time frame. I've got one more small question. It's a bit of an odd one, so bear with me. The micro-mobility operators, do we have any ability there to look at potentially having higher fees for the ones that are, or higher, I think they're called deposits, for the ones who aren't good at looking after their devices, resulting in, for example, illegal dumping and helmets left lying around the place and stuff like that, or parking them in annoying places, for the ones that are basically behaving badly or operating in areas that have a higher risk of operating badly. I'm thinking about what we do for the liquor licensing ones, where there's that sort of point system based on the level of anticipated harm and which community they're operating in. We wouldn't need to make it that complicated, but is there potentially some flexibility in that space to, rather than trying to apply penalties after the fact, get those who have a poor record to pay more?
I'll ask if my colleagues who are online can assist with that. Kevin Smith, are you able to assist with a response to that question?
Sure, Andrew. Through the chair. There is a monitoring fee for the micromobility operators. So that fee entails a sort of an hourly rate basis of charging, and it would pick up some of those elements that the councillor is talking to.
Good questions. Thank you. Daniel Newman, please.
Just going back to the issue of the facility, the active communities charges. If we are not anticipating a significant increase in revenue as a result of this fee harmonisation exercise in the middle of a very contentious annual plan, why are we proposing to do this at this point? Is it simply about providing a consistent baseline for which local boards will need to make an adjustment, or is this something you've wanted to do for some time? Why does this have to be done right here, right now, in this particular space, if it doesn't generate a significant increase in your net revenue position?
This was part of one of the items that was scheduled as part of the triennial fee review process that we discussed with the councillors, I think, last year. It's the first stage in the review, allows us to standardise the fees and therefore be charging people similar amounts to play badminton in different parts of the city. So it's also a first step to looking at a second stage to be considering the appropriate cost recovery levels. So we would recommend we proceed on that basis.
Okay, that's all the questions I've got, so I'll put the vote. Oh, we got... Oh, no comment. I'll have a move and a seconder first of all to accept that. Fletcher Newman and Henderson as the commentator.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, look, guys, I won't be supporting 1K in here, and it's in line with the questioning and in line with some of the discussions I've had in workshop as well. Communities were promised that if they support the climate action targeted rate, they would get a specific suite of services that actually went out in the consultation. So down to the bus route. So they supported us levying the kata on that basis. So if we were to then go back and do it again, then if there's any hint that we're trying to backfill services with a special rate that we asked people about, then that's misleading to the public, that's undemocratic, it flies in the face of consultation processes. We also, and Julie Ferry brought this up as well, these cuts were untargeted. They were based on the availability of drivers, not people actually needing to take the bus from those areas. And we actually had a presentation on this in the last Transport Committee. So, you know, be aware as well that the recent immigration settings are going to mean that hopefully the bus driver shortage is a thing of the past. So why would we set in stone Auckland Transport's ability to go behind the public's back, essentially, undemocratically try and change their bus routes, based on a problem that will hopefully not exist in the near future? So we've already consulted. So I'm merely asking Auckland Transport to deliver what they promised to our communities. I just don't think that's too much to ask. Thanks, Mayor.
That's a good point. I think in some of the ones I've worked, there's not been so much a bus driver shortage, but a bus passenger shortage as well. Nevertheless, we'll have Councillor Dalton, and then I have someone had their hand up.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to build on what Councillor Henderson has said, the projects in there were deliberately targeted to help provide equity as well. So 2 routes out my way, as an example, we know that the largest household expense for our people, 30% is owning a car, to provide some sort of equity by the opportunity to now get on a bus is something that we should be trying our best to achieve. And as Shane said, these were consulted on and they are an expectation from our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dalton. Councillor Walker, please.
Sure. I'm entirely supportive of this council being nimble, and if we have to reapply money because we're otherwise funding buses that are not carrying any people, not because there even aren't drivers, but on routes where there simply aren't people using them, then we should be applying that money to actually make real reductions in emissions. Otherwise, what are we here for? Surely the climate action targeted rate revolves entirely around a word, which is action. And if we're not taking action, what is the point? I specifically asked the question when this climate action rate was put up to Auckland Transport and to Council, did we have flexibility forecasting this issue? And the answer that I got back was yes, we had flexibility. So in that instance, let's use it, let's apply it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is a governance and oversight group which presumably are exercising some form of sensible discretion. Deputy Mayor Simpson.
Thank you. Look, I'm only speaking because I'm responding to Councillor Henderson and potentially Councillor Dalton, and I just draw your attention to the specific wording of K, which is agree to consult on. So there is an option for Aucklanders, of course, to say no.
On that case, I'm going to put the vote, please. All those in favour of accepting this, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary? Are you okay with it? Did you say?
I'm okay, but I oppose it.
Can I record against KU2, please, Mayor?
And me too, please.
Oh, here we go.
Hey, stop. Cops. Item 11.